Hello everyone, a satellite image here of a Russian defensive position. Now it is one that we did look at yesterday, but today a high quality image was released from the 15th of November, so I thought we would take a look at it in more detail. The image is from Maxar and is very high quality. This is at Novotroitske, shown by the arrow here. Here is the image. As you can see, it's very detailed imagery, which is why I thought this defensive network was worth a fresh look. To get orientated, this is along the P47 road, which leads northwest to southeast from Kakhovka to the eastern entrance into Crimea. It's very well fortified, as you can tell. Since this is a very detailed image, I'm going to zoom in on each part separately, labelled 1 to 8 here, and looking at the big image on its own is going to be nowhere near detailed enough, which is why I'm going to zoom in. First, let's look at part number 1, the trench at the north first. This is an anti-tank trench. Only a section of it is shown on this image, but it's just under 4 kilometers long in total, heading roughly west to east and spanning the road. Now, I may be wrong, but comparing the trench with the road, I estimate it to be over 12 meters wide. Russia operates two types of trenches, the MDK-3, which can dig a trench 3 meters deep and 3.5 meters wide, so the trencher would have done multiple routes to get the trench this wide. The second one, BTM-3, digs smaller trenches, 1.5 meters deep, 1.1 meters wide. So I think the MDK-3 would have been used here. No dragon's teeth are visible at this part. Let's move on to section 2, shown here on the western side of the defensive network. So here we can see the infantry trenches. So first of all, we have a triple row of dragon's teeth, pyramid-shaped anti-tank blocks. Just to recap, the dragon's teeth operate by being forced backwards by the tank, with a rear point pressing into the ground, which then rotates the pyramid upwards and under the tank, wedging it in place. Or that's how they are intended to work. Really, they don't seem like they will work as advertised. So we have a triple row of dragon's teeth spanning the infantry trench, which is zigzagged in shape. This infantry trench spans about 2 kilometers or thereabouts. Spaced out along the infantry trench are some small rear positions. These look like they could be billets or rest areas for troops stationed here not currently on duty, possibly to rest, eat, relax while not manning the trenches themselves. There are a number of white objects which look like they could be temporary buildings, possibly generators. Who knows, I'm not really quite sure. I have labelled the next trenches as entrances because these ones lead back to the third trench, which then leads back to the roads. So all of these trenches interconnect via these entrance trenches or passageway trenches. You may notice the trench sort of ends where a path goes along the surface. It makes no sense for these trenches not to connect, so I expect there's a short tunnel there leading into the infantry trench. Or, it's also possible, these will be completed once the defensive network is finished and there's no need for a path going over the top. You may notice that the floor of the trench is white. We have photos from a similar trench in Crimea, showing that Russia is laying down metal sheeting at the bottom to walk on. I think that's what we are seeing with the white bits inside the trench. Given these infantry trenches are smaller and narrow, I think it's very likely that the BTM-3 was used to make these. So they could be around 1.5 meters deep and about 1.1 meters wide. Moving on to section 3, this is the central part of the infantry trench. It's pretty much the same as section 2. We can see the triple row of dragon's teeth halting at the road, and that the infantry trench continues as it did, a jagged trench interspersed with a number of small rear areas. What is quite interesting is in the blue square, what look to be 3 large concrete blocks. If this area is threatened, perhaps these will be moved out onto the road to block it. There isn't any sign of a checkpoint. I was expecting there to be one. Perhaps one will be established later on. We also get a nice view of the other entrance trench which leads to the eastern part of this defensive network. The fourth section we're going to look at is the eastern section of the 1st Infantry Trench. This is a bit harder to see because the shadows are blocking it, but they are pretty much the same as what we've just looked at. 3 rows of dragon teeth, a zigzag infantry trench interspersed with rear trenches. These ones look to be a bit more active. There are a few white objects in the trenches, which I assume are temporary structures or tents being set up. I've highlighted a section at the bottom right. This is the start of the 3rd row of trenches. Here, there's a white object on the road, could be a van, and the inside of the trench is covered with some sort of white object, a tarpaulin perhaps, but I'm not sure what it could be covering. It could just be to make the trench more comfortable and waterproof. I know at the moment the white stands out, but with winter approaching, it could be planning ahead in terms of camouflage. It could also be covering something that needs protection from the elements, such as radio equipment for example. Whatever is covered could be related to the white object which appears to be a van. Honestly, I'm not sure really, just spitting ideas out. Now on to part 5, and we're going to go back to the western side of the defensive network, looking at the 3rd trench which spans east to west. This trench you can see 2 heading north towards the 1st Infantry Trench. Then, this one itself, heading west to east, isn't as zigzagged as the first one. You'll also notice there's none of these rear sections which we saw earlier interspersed along. It's just a long, slightly zigzag trench. This one doesn't look like it's intended to be occupied for a long period of time, unlike the 1st Infantry Trench which, if this area is threatened, will likely have troops stationed in it for the duration. I'm guessing this is a trench which we will then, perhaps, fall back to if needs be. There's a trench heading southeast which eventually connects to the main road. Interspersed along this trench are small white objects, and looking at these I wonder if these may be pillboxes intended to be placed inside the trench at select places alongside it. There isn't too much to look at here, so let's move on to part 6, on the eastern side of the road. First of all, this trench is unfinished as of 15th of November. This section is a little bit more interesting than the last we looked at. There's a small square-shaped position, which I think could be a mortar position. I'll zoom in on it. It also looks unfinished, but it comes back from the secondary infantry trench and consists of 4 small sections, partially separated by earthen walls. I can't help but wonder if mortars are meant to be placed here, separated from each other for protection. There are also 2 of those rear trenches interspersed along, similar to what we saw on the 1st Infantry Trench. Could be where the mortar teams go to rest, eat and that sort of thing when not on duty, if indeed this is a mortar position. We'll now move to section 7, the eastern edge of the 2nd Infantry Trench. It's a section we looked at earlier, the part which looks to be covered by a white tarpaulin. I'd love to read your thoughts as to what this is. Russia doesn't seem to care much about the comfort of its troops, so I can't see this being a dry spot for them to rest. So I think if it's indeed a tarpaulin, then it's some sort of weather-sensitive equipment here being kept out of the elements. As we've discussed this earlier, let's move on to the most interesting section, the southern bit of the emplacement and the heart of this defensive position. And I'll jump straight into the object which stands out like a sore thumb, the weird little hill thing. Now, this caused much speculation among the Discord group, with ideas ranging from a place to store ammo to a type of watchtower. The answer, however, is much more mundane, and it appeared when I actually found where this place was on Google Maps. Here it is on Google Maps, so it wasn't built by Russia. Now, it isn't labelled. It is some sort of man-made mound with a structure on top. It could be a small ruin of a watchtower, or even a memorial of some sort, but it wasn't something built by Russia like I first thought. If anyone from Ukraine knows what this is, let me know in the comments. I'm quite curious about it. But even though that's mundane and not built by Russia, that's not to say this section isn't worth a look. Russia seems to have turned this area into a command section for this defensive position, building it all around the mound. First, there's a number of vehicle berths built out of earth on the western side of the mound. These won't be for artillery, but rather safe places to park vehicles such as trucks, BMPs, MTLBs, and protect them from artillery fire. North of the vehicle area is an unknown spherical structure. Not too big, I don't know what that is. Moving clockwise, a network of trenches being dug. This could be intended to be the command area. There is a small white structure among them, and while these look finished, it does look like work is going on to increase the size of it. So I wonder if this is going to be the command area where, the radio and communications equipment is and that sort of thing. On the right hand side of the mound, it is hard to tell, but it looks like Russia has possibly made an entrance into it. This, of course, all depends on what the mound is, if it's a hill that can be dug into, or even it's possible there may be some sort of room inside it anyway, and of course how structurally secure the mound is. But construction work of some sort has been going on there. Earthen walls have been built, and it does look like you can possibly now get into it, like there's a entrance leading into the mound. Near that area, there's a small, possibly sandbag wall. Finally, at the southern bit of the mound, there's what looks to be 2 generators. So pretty interesting, quite an extensive network of trenches. So to summarise, we have an anti-tank trench 4 kilometres long, 3 rows of dragon's teeth pyramids, an infantry trench with rear positions, likely for troops to rest when not on duty manning the trenches interspersed throughout, a secondary infantry or access trench with possible storage area on the eastern side, and also a possible mortar position, then a command post with vehicle berths. Going back to the map showing Russia's known Kherson defensive positions so far, this is, as far as we know, the final position on that road from Kakhovka, which eventually leads to Crimea. So that's it for this video. It is a position we did look at before, but in much less detail. Now I do plan to do more videos on the defensive positions shown on this map. Perhaps my next one will be the ones in and around the area of the Kimburn Spit. In the meantime, if you found this video interesting, please click like and subscribe. I'd appreciate it. Thanks again, and take care everybody.